So, there I was, wanting to write a script for an upcoming episode of One Perfect Enemy about the zombie man from classic Doom. But then people on YouTube pointed out that the Imp was far more recognizable, which made me stop for a bit and reconsider. It's true, the zombie man isn't as iconic, but offers things the Imp can't. And as I began to ponder, I realized that neither of them were truly the perfect enemies in the game. The Arachnotron, Revenant and Archvile were all definite candidates for the role. So should I make a video about more than one perfect enemy? But then I came to the conclusion that there really isn't a single quote-unquote best enemy in classic Doom. No, in fact each enemy has its own strength, weaknesses and most importantly, purpose. With no other enemy filling the same role to the same extent, overstaying its welcome or just feeling thrown in. None that really have too much health, like certain enemies from games like Serious Sam, or just being frustratingly annoying to fight, like the gargoyles from Blood. Instead, Doom has a really delicate balance between its enemy, level and weapon design, to the point that each part complements the others in perfect harmony. So literally to hell with it, let's just talk about that balance. Let's explore why these enemy designs are not just classic, but so iconic that even games these days still feel the need to copy and expand on them. Welcome to Doom's brilliant bestiary balance. We begin our analysis with the first and most unremarkable enemy, and the initial idea for this video, the Zombie Man. Not just the Rifleman, but the Shotgunners as well, due to being so similar. Dog. These guys really serve mostly just as cannon fodder, taking only a few bullets to the head before going down. Their existence boils down to the player trading bullets with them, quite literally in fact. Due to dying so quickly, the best idea is to kill them with their own weapons, since you get the same type of ammo back from them. Of course you can also use other weapons, in which case the strategy is to herd them into formation like cattle so you can shoot through them, or take out multiple targets with the splash damage of rockets. Or if you want to overkill, the BFG 9000. If you want to save up on ammo though, and why wouldn't you, you can also take them out incredibly quickly with Berserk or the Chainsaw. There's a reason they give it to you in the very first level of Doom 2 after all. They honestly feel more like walking ammo packs or decoration due to only rarely posing a real threat, especially considering how fast they die to even just a single exploding barrel. However, since their attacks are hitscan, that is hitting the target instantly instead of waiting for a bullet to travel, you can't really dodge their attacks. So if they aren't taken care of quickly, they can easily overpower you and drain your health even from a distance. I think people's hatred of hitscan in games mostly stems from a misunderstanding of how it's supposed to work. Hitscan attacks are meant to give weaker enemies a chance to stay relevant even late into the game, by not dealing a lot of damage but dealing it more reliably than other enemies. Therefore, they're meant to be killed as soon as possible before the numbers add up. And that's the key word. What they lack in firepower, they make up for in numbers, with overwhelming the player being their main goal. So it's a balance of them peppering you with bullets from all directions, while being not at all difficult to stop from doing so. And once you do, you get rewarded with their glorious jibs and wonderful wails. Worth noting is that shotgunners can be remarkably dangerous up close, but they don't fire often enough for them to become a real problem, especially if you keep a distance. Unlike, however, the heavy weapons guy, dude. Despite being so similar to the other two, this zombie can easily stand on his own. Once he's locked onto you, he'll fire custom tool cartridges at 10,000 rounds per minute out of his chain gun at you, until you either die or get out of sight. This makes him extremely deadly even at a distance, because he just never ever stops firing. It doesn't help that he has as much health as two zombie men and a shotgunner combined, making him not impossible to deal with, but certainly not something to scoff at either. When chain gunners are grouped together with other enemies, they become an immediate target, since their hit scan allows them to kill you faster than you can think. Alternatively, their rapid fire allows for you to see cover behind other enemies and initiate infighting without much effort. And even if keeping a distance isn't guaranteed to spare you from their fire, you can return the favor with their own weapons and simply tap the button to snipe them from afar. Should you get too close, however, it's not frowned upon to use the plasma rifle or rocket launcher on them either due to the large health pool. Let's leave the human enemies behind and instead take a look at Hell's minions, starting with the Imp. This one is certainly the most iconic character in the entire series, and for good reason. After all, they were the first enemy to do something that wasn't really possible in first-person shooters before at the time, throwing projectiles in a 3D space. The creators even intentionally placed an Imp on a higher ledge in the very first level of Doom 1 to really demonstrate the existence of a vertical axis, by making them hurl their fireballs at you from above. And this reappears several times throughout the classic titles, and even in games of the modern era like Dusk. Truly a memorable moment. But nostalgia aside, that fireball is a double-edged sword, weak on its own, but becomes more threatening in large numbers. Since they move relatively slowly, they might be easily dodged, but it also means that they linger. Sure, a faster projectile is more difficult to avoid, but once you do, it's gone. But several slower projectiles that stay in the air for longer have to be avoided the entire time. This applies to all fireball-based attacks in the game, but imps appear very often in groups, so theirs are much more of an issue. They also don't have a lot of HP, being slightly weaker than chaingunners, but can still withstand around 1 or 2 shotgun blasts to the face. This makes them, in my opinion, the most well-rounded enemy in regards to damage dealt and damage taken. Not too much and not too little. While hitscan weapons are effective against them, you can also take them out with a chainsaw or your fists using Berserk. A lot of levels in Doom 1 and 2 that feature imps usually also feature a Berserk power-up nearby, so you can again save ammo by going on a killing spree. This then creates a very nice quote-unquote dance of death with the imps, getting close enough to punch them, but stepping back in time to avoid getting your face clawed off. Though the next enemy does this dance even better, namely the Demon or Pinky. This one is the first melee-only enemy in the series, which makes them really not hard to kill as they can only attack if you actually get in range. And even if you are too close, you can avoid their bite by just moving aside. This means that you can usually ignore them in favor of other enemies that pose a more immediate threat. However, Pinkies might be stupid, but shouldn't be underestimated. It takes a while for them to cover the distance between them and you, but once they do, they can easily maul you to death. They're also quite beefy, not just in terms of health, but size as well, being very difficult to avoid in tight spaces. On top of that, with twice as many hit points as chaingunners, they're a lot harder to stop. So much like zombies and imps, they become a very large threat when they corner you. Their predictability and pure girth makes them a perfect target for the super shotgun however, dying in exactly one blast. Rockets and plasma are another option, but much like imps, they also appear often in the same levels as berserk packs and can be taken out thusly. Demons also come in another flavor, namely specters. These are unfortunately the first enemy I'd classify as truly pointless, at least these days. Back in the days of DOS, these creatures were harder to spot due to the pixelated graphics, lack of colors and dark lighting, blending in with environments. But in the days of source ports like GZ Doom, they're just as easy to spot as the regular Pinkies, and they don't offer anything besides their camouflage, or lack thereof rather. On to an enemy that does offer something unique, the Cacodemon. Yet another very iconic character from the games, even though the design is clearly ripped off. I don't mind though. For some reason, their appearance speaks to me. In essence, they're a floating imp, so the same said about them applies here as well. They usually don't appear in large numbers, but can take a few more punches and move much slower. This means that they're easily taken out with rockets or plasma, but even firing the BFG directly at them is a good idea. If you can get a hold of them near the floor, they're also particularly vulnerable to the chainsaw, since they're very prone to being staggered. If you can't, however, well, that makes it a bit more difficult. Their biggest strength is that they can fly just about anywhere and fire upon you from places you could never even dream of reaching. To make matters worse, if they do get hit with a rocket, they tend to immediately fly off into the opposite direction, making it harder to follow up with an attack. Due to their slow speed, you're required to be patient with them, which means they're too risky to target if they're ground units as well. Those can attack you instantly, while Cacos just float menacingly around you. This also makes it more risky to fire rockets at them, since the enemies on the same floor as you can potentially block them and make them explode in your face. So learn to live with them until you think you can get a clear shot. Let's check off all the flying enemies while we're at it and take a look at the Lost Soul. This one doesn't fire projectiles, it instead skips the middleman and just charges at you directly, to unfortunately good results. In fact, one could argue that they're basically sentient fireballs that can change direction and don't explode and hit. They are one of the most annoying enemies in the series, mainly because they're just too good at what they do, even despite the fact they're easily disposed of with just a few blasts of the shotguns. When they appear by themselves, they are merely a nuisance, but they rarely do. Commonly hunting in packs, their sole purpose seems to be to overwhelm the player yet again, but this time from above as well. In most situations, you can ignore them while taking care of other enemies first. They just become a larger problem if they start getting in your face all at once, or if they start body blocking your rockets. Therefore, use any weapon on them that can take them out instantly from a distance, like the hitscan guns, or even just the chainsaw. Luckily, they're rare enough to never become a massive crick in the neck, is what I would say were it not for the pain elemental. There are not enough words in any language to describe how much I hate this enemy. It's quite literally the single worst one I have encountered in any game I have ever played, both of the video and board kind. The Lost Soul might be too good at its job, but the Pain Elemental invented the job and perfected it. It doesn't attack you directly, instead merely spewing out Lost Souls, at an alarming rate at that. Why yes, they did turn the strategy of annoying a sibling by holding a hand up to the face and going, I'm not touching you, into an enemy. Each second that they're alive, they become more and more of a problem. And it's not even that hard to kill them, with 2 bursts of the super shotgun being enough. But actually getting there is easier said than done, because they can fly out of reach, much like the Cacodemons. And not only do they spam Lost Souls when alive, which I just pointed out were most dangerous in groups, they also release up to 3 souls upon death. You have to be a cruel designer to allow something like that to exist. And yet they don't appear all that often throughout the game, and if they do, never more than 2 at once. So it's not like the creators were being completely unfair, even though they could have easily increased the difficulty artificially by placing them everywhere. No, they're sprinkled in here and there, just enough to be an obstacle, but not enough to drag the levels down. Well, maybe they also did it because I'm pretty sure that would have crashed most computers back then. Let's ground ourselves with another ground type enemy again, the Baron of Hell. This one's of the classic tough guy type, essentially just being a stronger version of the Imp. High health, high damage, high speed. Going up against one of them is a fair challenge, since one mistake can easily suck your health away. More than one, or even when accompanying other foes, is even worse because you have to juggle them all at once. They made them the first bosses of Doom 1 on purpose after all. Your best choice is hitting them with your strongest weapons as fast as possible. Rockets, plasma, BFG, it all works. The chainsaw is a really poor choice since they'll quickly scratch your face off if you use it. If you're good at the Dance of Death however, the Berserk can work much better. The Hell Knight is a bite-sized version of the Baron of Hell because Sandy P doesn't like the design and wanted more of them around. This one is basically the middle state between the Imp and the Baron, being stronger than the former but weaker than the latter. In classic middle child fashion, they don't really have any presence compared to them though. Even their design is just a washed out Baron. This means that they're the unlucky winner of my Filler Enemy in Doom award. At least Spectres were different enough in one version of the game. Granted, they're not bad enemies since they do offer up a good challenge, but they're incredibly forgettable and it doesn't surprise me that people often confuse them for the Barons and vice versa. A much more memorable character is the Revenant though. Dude, spoopy skeleton man. These are just iconic due to their honestly goofy design. I know that skulls are meant to be grim reminders of her own mortality, but then why do they look like they're smiling all the time? The Revenant is what the Hell Knight should have been. A less powerful Baron, but with a twist. That twist being the ability to fire homing missiles. They aren't that fast, meaning you can dodge them with ease, and even invoke infighting by getting them to hit other monsters. However, these missiles do linger around even more than fireballs, since they will just follow you all the time. Even if you dodge them once, they might circle back around to hit you in the back. This means that Revenants can become rather deadly simply by spamming their attacks. Aside from that, they're not so tough. 2 blasts from the super shotgun disposes of them normally, but even a couple rockets or plasma shots are fine. If you're adventurous, whacking them with Berserk also works. Just don't get too close or they'll sucker punch you to death. What a way to go. Sticking with iconic monsters, here's the Archvile. They're one of the most reviled, get it, enemies in the Doom community, but as for me, I think they're god tier. In fact, I made a video about that a million years ago if you're interested. I think they're the perfect special enemy and truly our Doom guys' arch nemesis. They're faster than demons, have more health than Hell Knights, potentially do more damage than Barons, and they can attack you from just about any distance. Not only that, but their fire attack is essentially a hitscan one that isn't blocked by enemies and which even flings you into the air when hit. Doom doesn't have snipers, but this is the closest thing to them. They're hard to fight by themselves, impossible when in groups, and you're not even safe from them by staying far away. Oh, and did I mention that they resurrect fallen enemies, completely negating your process and wasting your ammo? Yeah. This makes them the target of the highest priority, even more than some of the boss enemies we'll look at later. Because nothing is worse than singling you specifically out of a group and effectively doubling the amount of enemies you fight. If Doom 1 had had these fellas as the bosses of episode 1, I doubt many people would have been even able to beat it. Your best strategy is to spam every high damage attack you have on them, instantly and without hesitation. I prefer to save up my BFG just for these bastards, it really is worth it. They don't make the rounds often, but when they do, it's an experience to haunt you for life. On the other hand, seeing or hearing them die is one of the most relieving things in Doom. The Mancubus is the complete opposite of the Archvile, being not thin and nimble, but beefy and slow. They also have a lot in common with the Cyber Demon, being basically a smaller version of him. Mancubi fire 2 balls of fire in bursts of 3. These are incredibly powerful, doing as much damage as a Baron's but having a hitbox that's twice as large. Your best weapon against them is the rocket launcher or plasma rifle, since their large size and slowness prevents them from dodging projectiles. This also allows you to hide behind them to be safe from damage, or even use them as targets for infighting. While they're not immediate priority targets, you should definitely kill them sooner rather than later, lest they set the very air you breathe on fire. Another mini-me of a boss enemy is the Arachnotron, a smaller spider mastermind. They're really balanced in my opinion, being faster than the average beast, but also having as much health as Hell Knights and therefore dying reliably to rockets, plasma or super shotgun blasts. Their own plasma shots, however, are something to be reckoned with. They can spam them very quickly and, like the Archvile, from just about any distance, and these balls travel fast. I've mentioned at the start that slower projectiles tend to linger around longer than quicker ones, but that doesn't really matter if there are simply more of them. They essentially shoot them in one long line, and it's almost impossible to get from one side of the line to the other without taking damage. And if there are more than one Arachnotron, you must be a master at Tauhu to be able to dodge them all. Arachnotrons are also often placed in large empty areas with long sightlines, meaning they can easily target you from afar. However, enemies have just as hard a time to not get hit by them, meaning that infighting is a viable solution to this problem too. Really not a bad special enemy whatsoever, and I always have a good time fighting them. It's helped by the fact that their death sound is my favorite one in the entire series. You can really feel their brain bursting open from intense pressure. And finally, we've reached the 2 boss enemies. Let's begin with the Spider Mastermind, the big mama of the Arachnotrons, but also essentially of the chaingunners. Don't ask me how that birth went. She's incredibly deadly with her massive chain gun that she won't stop spamming until the target is either too far away or too dead. The player can tank that damage if she's at a distance. Unfortunately, she almost never is, meaning you should take her out as soon as possible, and after your date, kill her. This is actually as easily said as done, because she goes down frighteningly fast with a few shots of the BFG. This makes her a rather lackluster final boss of Doom 1, and it would be a bigger problem if she wasn't relegated to only a few appearances throughout the series, most of them being gimmicky. However, should you not have access to plasma ammo, she becomes much harder to kill, as she's immune to the blast damage of rockets. But at this point, you should have realized how easy it is to get enemies to target each other the faster they fire their weapons, and the Spider Mastermind is no different. Turns out her children resent her just as much as you do, probably because they were asked to pick up the toys one time too many. What an incredible design for an enemy though, I just love it. Mwah. And the fact you can hear her scream no matter where you are in a level makes this a pretty terrifying boss the first time you come across her. And finally, the last enemy, not just of the boss kind, the Cyber Demon. Another hugely iconic character due to his design and sheer presence. This one appears more often in the Spider Mama, and he's essentially the final form in the evolution line of the Imp, Hell Knight, and Baron of Hell. Initially the boss of the second episode of Doom 1, I think he makes a far better reoccurring special enemy. He fires 3 rockets in a row, which might have been harder to dodge back when circus rafing wasn't a thing, but these days it's just far too easy. However, you still have to watch out for the rocket's splash damage by not positioning yourself near walls or other enemies when he's around. And they might be easy to avoid, but if they do hit, they're gonna take a large chunk of your health away. And unlike you, the Cyber Demon is immune to splash damage himself, meaning your best bet is to take him out with plasma attacks. What a beast though, it's no wonder he is one of the most well-known bosses in gaming history. So, as you can see, each enemy in the classic Doom games fills a certain role and has a clear purpose. There are the fodder enemies like zombies, imps, demons, which are easy to deal with by themselves but might become a problem in large numbers. Supportive enemies like chaingunners, Cacodemons, pain elementals, lost souls, and revenants are a bit tougher, but usually not a problem if fought alone either. Their job is more to assist other enemies from various angles and distances. Specialists are enemies that are deadly even just by themselves and should be taken out as soon as we possibly can. But if you can't, or they manage to get together with other enemies, it's tough luck for you. These would be the Barons of Hell, Arachnotrons, Mancubi, and of course, Archviles. And finally, there are the 2 bosses, the Spider Mastermind and Cyber Demon, which might not appear very often, but are a massive roadblock when they do. Despite having such a large cast, not a single enemy in Doom really leaves its role or blurs the lines between roles in general, and they all scale wonderfully with the game's structure, something that's not necessarily the case in all FPS games. Cultists from Blood, for instance, are always a huge threat due to being extremely proficient at hit scanning you, no matter if you're early or late in the game. The same can be said about certain enemies from Duke Nukem 3D, or even just the soldiers from id's own Wolfenstein 3D. These ones are often either too annoyingly placed or are just too strong in certain situations. That's all perfectly fine, of course, and fits these games well, for the most part. The difference, however, is that in Doom, all the enemies are predictable. You always know exactly how to deal with each type, which ones to target immediately and which ones to ignore for now, as well as which weapons to use and when. Shotguns and chain guns work well against fodder enemies, especially when in groups, but can also take down beefier ones. The plasma rifle and rocket launcher work just as well in the same situations, but should probably be saved up for specialists or bosses due to ammo for those guns being rarer. The same applies to the BFG 9000, which makes quick work of any type, meaning you should use it against priority targets that have to die as soon as possible. And even the chainsaw and berserk can work against single targets. The pistol might be rather useless overall, but at least it can snipe enemies from afar when tapping the fire button, much like the chain gun. In fact, there's such a delicate balance between the enemies and weapons that I'd argue the super shotgun almost ruins it, since it becomes too effective in most situations. You can use it to take out groups and tougher monsters within seconds, meaning the chain gun and especially the regular shotgun aren't as required anymore. Heck, sometimes even the plasma rifle and rocket launcher. It is one of the best weapons ever conceived in video games, but you can't tell me that it didn't at least chip away at the weapon balance established in the first Doom. The series is absolutely better off with it, but it just goes to show how much care and thought was put into the different stats. Plus, the super shotgun was required to be able to deal with a lot of enemies introduced in Doom 2. I mean, could you imagine taking down a pain elemental with just your shotgun? Ugh. At the very least, it's obvious why so many games copied Doom's structure, with even Quake essentially just building upon what was already established there. It's because these concepts worked and were simply reliable. It's like how almost all platformers have enemies to jump on and boxes that items come out of, just because Super Mario Bros. Pioneered these ideas. So if Blood was able to reinvent a tired old formula with its weapons in a way that hasn't really been done again even these days, Doom invented that formula in the first place. So it's no wonder why it's still around these days. Anyway, what do you think? I know this isn't a very controversial idea for a video, but I'd still like to hear if you have any more input, so comment down below if you do. And if you've enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like, subscribing, or perhaps even supporting me on Patreon. Just $1 a month gets you credited at the end and gives early access to new videos. Anything is appreciated. But for now, thank you very much for watching, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.